Universal Pictures and Imagine Entertainment invite you to experience the magic of the classic story as it comes to life like you've never seen before. In a place where the Christmas spirit is everywhere.
Have the best Christmas ever!
Well, almost everywhere.
Counting down the Christmas clock. Oh, young baseball.
Blast this Christmas music. It's joyful and triumphant.
Jim Carrey is
The Grinch. I must stop this Christmas from coming.
from Universal Pictures
But what would I wear? Oh,
and Imagine Entertainment.
forgot about the reindeer. Action! Brilliant!
Mr. Grinch, I myself am having some Yuletide doubts.
Don't care.
Maybe if you can reunite with the Who's and be a part of Christmas.
Maybe if you can reunite with the Who's and be a part of Christmas.
Grow up!
If you think you know the whole story,
What if it's all just a misunderstanding?
This could change my entire outlook on life.
Really?
No.
you don't know Grinch.
This is nuts! I'm going to throw up, and then I'm going to die!
Jim Carrey in a Ron Howard film. The Grinch.
Oh, somebody's fabulous!
All right, for all of the teenagers in the group, I want to make sure that you know something. When a couple of years ago, when this movie came out, I was a little bit offended because your boy was raised on the old school cartoon Grinch that stole Christmas. Come on, all of you 40 and older, y'all know what it's about. Y'all know what time it is whenever this thing. And I'm like, are there anything like sacred in this world anymore? That same year they did the remake of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory with freaking Johnny Depp as Willy Wonka. I'm like, dear God, what have we become as a society? There's only one Willy Wonka, son, and it was Gene Wilder. Come on, y'all know what I'm talking about? Johnny Depp and all your freakish ways, you know. So anyway, whenever I was like, okay, they're going to talk about the Grinch. Now, whenever I was doing some studying on this particular movie, this movie was written by Dr. Seuss, December the 26th, 1957. All right, the Grinch actually represents Dr. Seuss himself. All right. He said the day after Christmas, he was shaving. He was noticed that this fiendish smile came across his face the day after Christmas was over. And he wanted to write a story about and how to rediscover the Christmas that he felt like he had lost. He's like, he was busy all throughout the holiday seasons with deadlines and stuff like that. Maybe some of us today are like that, you know, where you're like, dude, I ain't feeling real Christmassy yet. And I'm wondering when I'm going to start. Where you're a little overwhelmed right now. I remember talking to somebody one time. They were breaking down. They're like, I don't feel like I'm in the Christmas mood because somebody told me Merry Christmas the other day. My first thought was, shut up. You know, yeah, you don't want to say that. You know, you're going to, for real, end up with some coal in your stocking. But have you ever been a part of Christmas holidays where whenever the day after Christmas, you're like, man, where did the holiday go? Our church in Atlanta was so large. Atlanta mega church, they run about 5,000 on the weekends. And we were so busy during the Christmas holiday season that we would have to have our Christmas party in October. All right? And so, like, our last 2 years, we were so busy during the Christmas holidays doing ministry. I mean, we had a singing Christmas tree. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Ministry every night. The last 2 years in Atlanta, Jennifer and I didn't even put up a tree. We're like, what's the use? You know, we ain't home. And I knew that times had gotten a little bit rough whenever not only did we not put up a tree, we gave each other cash that year for Christmas. Like, you know, go get yourself something nice. You're going, I'm like, man, where the holidays go, you know? If you haven't had the opportunity to see the movie, let me share the plot with you. The Grinch was this bitter grouchy cave dweller that supposedly had a heart 2 sizes too small. And he sees, he may be like some of us today, where you see the warm-hearted people enjoying Christmas. He looks down, he lives on the top of this mountain, and he sees the people living below him, and he purposes in his heart to stop Christmas. So on Christmas Eve, while everybody's asleep, he goes in their homes. He steals all their presents. He steals all their trees, and he steals all their food. And in the morning, when he looks down and he's preparing to throw all of this into this stuff into the abyss, he hears them singing a joyful Christmas song. And he begins to think maybe Christmas means more than presents and decorations and food. And so today, if you're a history buff, you're really, really going to like this message, because we're going to learn what the world was like at the time of Jesus' birth. Last week, you discovered how God was working behind the scenes before Jesus was born. And this weekend, we're going to see from the very beginning of Jesus' birth that there's always been some Grinch trying to steal Christmas. All right? We're going to go into some great historical detail. If you're here just checking out Christianity, and you're like, man, I really don't know where I'm at in my spiritual journey, this is a great Sunday to be here, all right? Every Christmas, we spend one message on this particular individual because, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a Christ follower, if you will listen very closely to what I say, you will never look at the scriptures the same way again. Because context is so important, isn't it? When you know what's been going on in the background, you can have a greater appreciation for the scriptures. But not only that, you're going to have a greater appreciation for Christmas because you're going to be able to see some things with a broader lens. So please pay close attention. I believe whenever I found out the historical context of Christmas, it became a game changer in my life, and it helped me to really be able to embrace the message of Jesus. Okay, we believe that God reveals His story through history. All right, at the time of Jesus' birth, the Roman army ruled the entire known world from India to England. All right. So the question began to be a question of logistics. How do you rule the world and maintain order when it could take up to 9 months to get to a place where that you'd conquered? What they did was they installed what was called puppet kings, who answered directly to Caesar, and they ruled those lands with iron fists just like Caesar would. All right? And in Israel, where Jesus was born, the king of their area was a guy by the name of Herod the Great. All right? He was a half Jewish, half Edomite king. Now, when Herod took over, he literally slaughtered thousands of innocent people to rise to power. And after he did this, to appease Caesar, what he did was he put all these different statues and altars everywhere proclaiming Caesar to be God. Now, if you don't understand, there's a lesson that our Jewish brothers and sisters have learned very, very well, that they don't build no idols. They're like, you know what? We have had our butt kicked very much by the devil for far too years. So, look, we may screw up on some other stuff, but we ain't building no graven images, all right? They didn't even build a graven image to Jehovah himself, more or less another guy. So whenever Herod did this did not endear him at all to the Jewish people. They're like, man, this dude is straight up pagan. This is wrong. Now, what we have to understand in its context is all this stuff about Herod. I remember one year where I was teaching on this, there was a guy that met me in the lobby, and he had a very interesting diagnosis on the message. He said, man, that guy Herod was a, and he said a swear word. And I was like, oh yeah, I mean, he defined that description. So let's get in there and let's describe what the king of Israel was like at the time. All right, the first thing we have to see is that Herod had many accomplishments. If you've ever been to the Holy Land, we just had a group from our church just get back from Israel just a few weeks ago. And most of the time, on all of these tours, they go and visit a place called the Fortress of Masada. All right? The way that all this happened is that Israel's great king David, whenever he was hiding from King Saul, he hid on the mountain of Masada. And so Herod finds this out, and he said, if your greatest king hid on Masada, I will live in luxury on Masada. And so he builds this 3-story palace on top of this mountain. He had marble all throughout the floors. He had hot and cold baths installed. He had a pool on the roof. How baller is that? All right. And this is 2,000 years ago. Now, here's what's so cool about this. Not only does he have this pool on the roof, his pool was so big And this happened in an area that had not had rain for 700 years. So how did he get the water there? He literally rebuilt the deserts, and any rainfall that happened would go directly to help fill up his swimming pool. Now watch this. He had enough water to be able to supply 10,000 people for 10 years. But he said, nope, having a killer pool is more important. So they're like, golly, what a selfish jerk. But this is who he was, all right? But here's the thing that we see, when you rebuild the deserts and the wadis and stuff like that, back in those days, there are people that are like, how in the world was he able to do this? There's a whole lot of different other accomplishments. He actually found a way to preserve food, where in the 1960s, some archaeologists found a jar of preserved figs that were 2,000 years old, and they ate the figs. And whenever I read about this, I was like, and I bet that after they ate those figs, they went to one of Herod's many bathrooms, because you can't eat 2,000-year-old figs. You can't do that. Your stomach ain't designed to do that. But anyway, the second thing that you got to know about Israel's Herod the Great was he was technologically advanced. You already heard about him rebuilding the desert. So he looks over there and he wants to build the state-of-the-art city. And he's like, you know what? This area is too swampy. But he knew he could make a lot of money if he had a state-of-the-art harbor. And so he drained the coastline and the marshes and totally changed the layout of the land. And he built what was called Caesarea Maritima. All right? You see the picture of it. And he named it after Caesar. Herod is also one of history's great brown-nosers. He wanted to make sure that he was like, love you, Caesar, man. You're the man. And so the largest port at this time in history was 60 acres. He built his port 520 acres. Now watch this. This is astonishing. He brought in concrete from Italy. He poured it 80 feet down in the ground and 100 foot wide under the ocean surface. He built an underground sewage system that would drain with the tides. 2,000 years ago. He built a palace over the ocean. On three sides he had ocean, and on one he had another freshwater pool, because Caesar did not like saltwater pools. He had to have freshwater. Come on, man. It was all about him. And so one day, history says that he's coming into the harbor and he saw Caesarea from a boat. He said, it's not beautiful enough. So he made the entire city out of marble. Okay? Today, when you visit Caesarea Maritima, if you walk along the beach long enough, you can pick up little shards of marble from the day that the Roman general Titus crushed it in 70 AD. It's still there. Third thing that we see about Herod is that he had 11 wives and 43 kids. A busy boy was our Herod, okay? Whenever you study this, one of my favorite things that I learned about this is that Herod's going on this long trip. And he talks to his head of security, and he goes, hey, come over here and let me talk with you. And he goes, yeah. He goes, if I get killed on this trip, do me a favor and kill my wife. And he's like, yeah, okay. Well, so somehow Herod's wife finds out that he was like, hey, I need you to kill this broad for me. And whenever they get back, guess what happens? She's a little bit distant. You think? You know? And so he actually killed her for being distant. All right, you're like, oh my God, this is like Godfather and Scarface type stuff that you're about to learn today, because this is really, really cool. And so he thought one of his sons was plotting against him, and he had him drown in the family pool. All right, where you're like, this dude crushes everybody. There were two other sons that were thought to be wanting this kingship. And they're brought to Herod to speak for themselves. You can Google these speeches, okay? And they're absolutely gut-wrenching. They begged their father for their lives. And he tells, they're like, told him, I'm innocent, I swear to you. He didn't believe him and he had him killed. This is a guy that you didn't screw around with. This is a guy that would kill you with the quickness, all right? Number 4, we see that he had a tremendous effect on religious culture. All right, he rebuilt the temple. Some of you know it's often called either the Second Temple or Herod's Temple. Now, watch this. This is really cool. He hired 18,000 people to make the Temple Mount bigger, and there to this day there's this marvel, this architectural marvel, because there's these things called Herodian stones. All right, some of these Herodian stones go 3 stories below the earth. They're 10 foot by 10 foot by 8 feet by 80 feet. They're almost impossible to move today, and he used 2.3 million of them. People still don't know how he did it. Okay? His other effect on the religious culture was an esteemed governing body disagreed with his theory on something, so he had them all killed. All right? It wasn't a good day to be a preacher because he killed the high priest twice. All right? At the time of his death, he's dying on his deathbed. Now look, this is the most Scarface gangster thing I've ever heard of in my life. All right? He's on his deathbed. He knows that death is coming. And he tells his security to lock up all these influential people in the Hippodrome. All right, which is this big stadium. He said, lock them all up. And whenever I die, kill everybody. That way I'll be guaranteed that people will cry at the point of my death. I was like, all right, that's gangster. I've never heard anything like that in my life. And so we see this, that also to help put all this in perspective, how did he get so powerful? Well, Herod is considered by many to be the richest man who ever lived. All right? He built a palace called the Herodian. Now watch this. Where he wanted the palace to be built. He said, I want this palace to be built on a mountain. All right? Well, the problem was where he wanted the palace to be built, there weren't any mountains. So guess what he did? He built a mountain. Like you do, you know. He hauls in all this sand and dirt and stone, and he builds the Herodian. All right, this huge mountain, this huge house where there was this pool on the pool on the mountain was so big to get to the gazebo in the middle of it, you had to take a boat. All right. Later on, a young rabbi takes his students to the foot of this mountain, and he's teaching them one day, and he says this to them. He said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be thou removed and cast in the sea, and if you doubt not in your heart, it'll happen just as you say. See, the best thing about history and the best thing about looking at scriptures is oftentimes there's more to the story if we're willing to look at it. All right? He built a lot of stuff not in Israel. He funded the Olympics one year. Some of you are like, cool, man. How did Herod get all of his money? I'm so glad that you asked. If you lived in Herod's day, he got it from you. Some are like, what are you talking about? Let me show you. 80 to 90% of the people living in Israel, they were involved in either fishing and agricultural work. Herod took 50% of all of your fish. He took 32% of your grain, and Caesar got another 12.5% of the grain. All right? So let's just say you're a fisherman. And by the way, somebody in my family, we're fishermen. Somebody try to take our fish, we will kill you dead. All right? But imagine you fished all night. And there's the tax man. They're at the dock whenever you pull up, and they're like, yeah, cough it up. All right? Half of it goes to, you may have caught like 50 fish. And it's okay, all right, 25 of it got to go to Herod. And you know what? I feel kind of generous today, so I'm only going to take 15 of your fish. And so you fished all night for 10 fish. All right? Everybody is in debt during Herod's day because he reduced the people to poverty. Jews had to live outside of the city. By the way, before Herod's time, you just can't get good kings. And so finally, if the oppression wasn't bad enough, one of these kings looked at all the people that were living inside of Israel because, there were farmers and they had all these sheep. And they're like, you know what? You people stink. You physically smell. All right. And you're stinking up this whole city. Now you got to live outside the city. So as if it wasn't enough. Not only did they take your stuff, did they take your land, but then they insulted you. We're like, dude, your BO has become a problem. All right. Make them live outside the city. All right. And so here's what you see in the time of Jesus' day whenever he was born. The only people that lived inside the city were the rich people, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They worked at Herod's temple, and they cooperated with Rome, and Rome left them alone as long as they didn't cause them any trouble. Now, here's the thing. The religious people that ran the Jewish temple, they'd say, don't you cause any problems with Rome. We will kill you today because you're messing with my money. The religious guys were like Big Worm on Friday to Smokey. Come on. So I say this illustration at least once a year, all right? And some of you are like, what is Friday? Don't worry about it. Those of us that know, we all know what we need to know. But There's this guy in the movie Friday where Big Worm, who was a entrepreneur, and he looks at a young man by the name of Smokey who is taking advantage of his supply of stuff. And he looked at me and he goes, Smokey, when you mess with my money, you mess with my emotions, all right? And so this was the same way where the religious people were telling everybody, here's the thing. Not only were you getting taxed out the nose, all right? But the religious people saw that they could take advantage of this thing too. So they charged a temple tax. You had to pay you 10% of your tithes. And there were several extra mandatory offerings every year. Here's what we got to understand, ladies and gentlemen. Most historians believe that the people of Israel lived under 90% taxation at the time of Jesus' birth. Of everything that you made, you got to keep 10% of it. A few people had all of the money and all of the land while the masses were starving. So now that you understand the historical context of all this, let me show you what the scriptures have to say. Look at Matthew chapter 2. It says this. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. You ever thought about asking yourself the question, why was he disturbed? Because Herod's disturbed because he's hearing this thing about a new king. All right, he's thinking, who do I have to kill now? I thought I killed off my kids that we're trying to raise up. There's a new kid. Here's the thing. Everybody wants to be a king, and I thought I'd totally smothered all that. His question is, who do I need a king now? So it said Herod was disturbed. And it said, and all of Jerusalem was with them. Why is Jerusalem disturbed? Do you recall what we said earlier? Who lives in Jerusalem? The rich people. The people who are running a racket on the poor. Who keeps their lifestyle going? Herod. So they're like, Herod better kill this dude quick or we're all screwed. Herod then kills every boy under 2 outside the city or inside the city of Jerusalem. Historians will say that was around 20 kids that were just slaughtered. Why? Because Herod kills everybody that gets in his way. When you and I read the book of Matthew, there's one resounding theme all throughout this book. And whenever you read this in your quiet time, every chapter asks this one question, and it's this: who is your king? Who's your king? That's the whole theme of the book of Matthew. And so during the time of this, right? Well, Herod's king. Herod kills my kids. He taxes me into poverty. And the religious system is so corrupt that they're messing you over too. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. When Jesus was born, the haves are getting more and more, and the have-nots are getting less and less. Herod is building swimming pools on top of Masada while you and your family starved. And ladies and gentlemen, you have to ask yourself the question, what are they thinking about Herod during this time? Has Herod been a good king? No. And so when they get this announcement that there's a new king come on the scene, here's what we got to understand about Christmas. The story of Christmas is not only is it about change, and not is only about green sweaters with Frosty the Snowman on, but here's the one resounding theme that we've got to understand about Christmas. Christmas is all about revolution. It's all about saying, this is a new time. Herod's going down. Caesar's going down. And let me let you know something. The announcement from the angels set it all into motion. When you've been oppressed for so long, this announcement of a new king, maybe this new kind of king will produce a new kind of people. People that will take care of people, not oppress people. Maybe it'll give birth to a new religious system where a church, instead of exploiting you, will give back to you and open their arms and say, this is what the kingdom of God is like. A new kind of king's coming down. And that means that Herod's going down. With this announcement, here's what I love so much about it. The announcement of this new king that's being born. Who was the first person that the angel appeared to tell the message about Jesus being born? It wasn't to the high priest or the religious people or the rich temple workers. Guess who it was? The first announcement that Jesus was being born was to them smelly old shepherds that had been kicked out of the city. Think about this. God begins restoring the self-esteem of people that have been afflicted for far too long. And here's the other part about this that maybe that'll blow you away. The Bible said that he appeared to there were shepherds who were keeping their flock at night, watching their flock at night. There's only one group of people that watched a particular flock of sheep at night. And guess who those people were? They were in charge of people. Those shepherds were in charge of watching the Passover lambs. When Jesus appears to those guys, he's saying, I'm going to be the lamb that's going to be slain before the foundation of the earth so that mankind can be set free. You get this news, and guess what? That there's this king's coming. What your response is absolute joy. To the lowest of the low, the angel appears. Imagine how you'd be feeling if your family had been killed by Herod. And there was a great chance that it was. Here's what has happened. And you're sitting there, Herod's going down. What's the point of the story? Why have you taken us on a 20-minute history lesson? What kind of joy can I get out of this? It's this, is what you've got to understand. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. It's all about one thing. The Herods of this world eventually die, but the kingdom of our God and of his Christ continues to go on and get bigger and bigger and bigger. We are a part of a church that never sleeps. The oppression that's happening over across our world, where the oppression is the strongest, the church is the strongest. Do you know what the fastest growing church in the world is right now? It's in the nation of Iran. I was listening to this. I was a part of this missions thing, and they were telling me about it. And I was talking to them. I was like, man, can y'all talk about Jesus? And they said, Chad, we can talk about anything we're willing to die over. You know what they have? They have this saying in the nation of Iraq. They said this is the kingdom of God is being poured out. The Spirit of God is doing such a great work over the world. And I remember hearing the man that was in charge of the assemblies of God in the nation of Iraq. He said, we have one motto. The last man to the last breath. Why? Because the Herods of this world don't win, ladies and gentlemen. There was a time, at the time of Jesus' birth, you could not have imagined anybody in history saying, everybody in the world is going to know who Herod was. And you and I are finding out about him today. Do you know why? Because that's not the way it works anymore. Because there's a baby that came on the scene and he changed everything. Maybe today you're facing a Grinch, kind of like Herod was like the ultimate Grinch. But you're facing a Grinch. There are different things that are trying to stop Christmas from coming in your life. Today you can look into the abyss and have peace because a new king has come on the scene and it's changed everything. Can I let you know, whatever you're facing right now, let me just confess something to you. During the holidays, as your pastor, I feel it. I feel the stress that you're under. It hurts me to know what you're under. But can I encourage you today? The oppressors of our lives don't win. Herod won't have the last word because a baby was born. Our God is in the restoring business. He's the one keeping tabs right now, okay? Many of us can look into the abyss of some bad situations this Christmas season and still have joy. Maybe you're staring into the abyss of loneliness. Maybe this is the first Christmas you've had without a loved one. You're like, Pastor Chad, man, I don't know how in the world I'm going to get through this holiday season without this person in my life. Can I just encourage you to quote to yourself the same thing that the angels said that God would be in their life, will still be in our life today. He said, he will be Emmanuel, God with us. When you're feeling overwhelmed with loneliness and depression this Christmas season, just say, God, you said you would be Emmanuel, God with us. Maybe you'll have to say it 20, 30 times a day to yourself. But that's the thing about our God. He works with those who trust him. Maybe you're looking at the abyss of debt. The Bible says that he would be the mighty God. He's powerful enough to take care of your bills, ladies and gentlemen. Last year, there were people in this church who had to receive from the Dollar Club to have a Christmas. You know? Somebody else bought their Christmas presents, their food and other stuff because they just had an awful 2016. God touched their hearts. They got God involved in their finances, and they started paying their tithes this year. And not only are they able to take care of their kids this Christmas season, they're also helping families who are in their situation last year. Ask them, do they think that tithing works? And they'll tell you yes. See, whenever you and I pay our tithes on what we make and on our Christmas bonuses and all these other things, what you say to God is, God, you have blessed my work, and now I want to bless your work. Maybe you're looking at an abyss of confusion where Chad, I'm so depressed. I don't know what's happened to me. Or you're struggling with some fear. The Bible says that he would be the wonderful counselor, the Prince of Peace, the mighty God, and the everlasting Father. Many of us are looking in the abyss of pain. About 5 years ago, Jennifer and I were talking with a friend and her husband. They go to another church. They're wonderful people. And this particular young lady, I've known her the majority of my life. She's been like a little sister to me. And she came to us as a last resort. She has struggled the majority of her life with anorexia and bulimia, with drugs and alcoholism. She, at this point, had burned all of her bridges with her parents and her siblings. And her marriage was hanging by a thread. And as we were talking, I was able to look at this young lady that was like a sister to me. And the Holy Spirit gave me a word of knowledge. And I looked at her and I said, you're going to have a baby. And God's going to heal your body, and you're going to be able to carry a baby full term. And you are going to be able to be one of God's best mothers. Almost a year to the date, about 2 weeks before Christmas, she was holding a healthy baby boy. This gal had gotten down to 68 pounds and weighed an average of about 88 pounds. This boy is just as healthy and it's just as full term. There's not anything unnatural about him. You know why? Because our God is still in the miracle business, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because there's been a baby that was born who gave his life for us. Maybe many of us need to do what we sang earlier, where we're going to speak the word over our situation. The abyss that you're looking at right now, it's not as deep as you think. Pastor Chad, man, I'm going through all this right now. It just seems like it's never ending. It's not as deep as you think. Do you know why? How can I say for certain that the Herods of this world don't win and God does? Because I know God's word and we know history. Look at me. In the 5th century, that Masada, that towering fortress, something got built there that changed everything. You know what got built there? A church. You know why? Because the Herods of this world don't win. Our God has a wonderful sense of humor, and he constantly proves all throughout history and to us today that he is a God that can be trusted. And when you and I know that, that is when we will experience the power of the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the birth of the Christmas season. And that is when the Gulf Coast will be saved. Would you stand and let's pray?